Welcome to today's Textile Talk. Today it is To Honor and Comfort Native Quilting Traditions. It's presented by the Modern Quilt Guild. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Brenna. I'm the Communications Manager of the Modern Quilt Guild, and I am joined today by Marsha MacDowell and Margaret Wood. So before we start, I always like to do some housekeeping things. So if you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please put a note in the Q&A box, and I or Lucy from SACWA can help you find a solution to your tech issue. It is always an option to close out of your Zoom and then rejoin with the link in your email. That solves most of the problems we see. And don't worry, we will still be here. We'll still be talking about quilts, and anything you missed, this is being recorded, so you can catch it in the recording. The recording of this textile talk will be added to the MQG resources page and to SACWA's website. There will be Q&A at the end of the discussion, so we'll get to as many questions as we can, but do be sure to put your questions in the Q&A box so that we can have them for the Q&A session. We also respectfully ask you to be courteous as you engage with speakers, moderators, and other participants. The chat box is for greeting others and a survey for commentary and ways to improve. If you prefer not to see any notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat box to toggle them on or off. We are also very excited to be experimenting with a new Zoom feature, live captions. So if you are, we are really excited that this will make Textile Talks more accessible to and make it available to a wider audience. But if you prefer not to see the captions, you should be able to turn them off. For those of you who are new to Textile Talks, this is a series of free weekly presentations and panel discussions from fiber art organizations, including the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Studio Art Quilt Associates, Surface Design Association, and us at the Modern Quilt Guild. We could not do this without our amazing sponsors. So a big thank you to the Textile Talk sponsors, which are Moda Fabrics and Supplies, Quilting Daily. We also have eQuilter.com, Aurifil, Artistic Artifacts, Clover, Empty Spool Seminars, Misty Fuse, Nine Patch Fabrics, Quilt Mania, Schiffer Publishing, thequiltshow.com, and Thai Silks. Before we begin with our presentation, I'd love to introduce both Marsha and Margaret. So let's start with Marsha first. Marsha MacDowell is a Ph.D. She is a professor and curator of folk arts and quilt studies at Michigan State University Museum, and she is the director of the Quilt Index. She has authored numerous publications on quilt history. Margaret Wood is also joining us today. She is a quilt artist and clothing designer. She is Navajo and Oklahoma Seminole Indian descent that is reflected in her artwork. She's an active volunteer with American Indian organizations in Arizona. With that, I will go ahead and make myself invisible until the end of the presentation for the Q&A. So Marsha, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, shoot. Now where is the share screen button? Ay. Okay. I'm sorry, you all. I am not seeing the little button at the bottom of my screen that says share screen. Oh, I now see it. Okay. Sorry. And slideshow. Okay, thank you for being patient. So this is just the opening slide, and I will go immediately to the next one. We thought we would just start out by telling you that our presentation today evolves out of sharing of research interests and quilt making interests on Margaret's part. I am just a person who loves to research quilt history. So the project to honor and comfort Native quilting traditions was one that was precipitated by the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian. A curator there, a staff member said, whose name the late Fred Nowooksy, challenged I and my husband, Kurt Dewhurst, whose name is on that book, to do an investigation of quilting activity in the US. We had already done some research on quilt history in Michigan. And so he had come and stayed with us and got very interested. And because he was Comanche and Cherokee, he says his grandmothers on both sides quilted. So we embarked on this project with the Smithsonian, and it eventually ended up in an exhibition that was shown at the museum facility in New York City, and then it toured across the country to a number of major museums. And University of New Mexico Press, Museums of New Mexico Press, issued this book that had contributions from a number of individuals. Kurt and I served as the editor, and Margaret was one of the contributors of a little essay in that book too. So what was fun about this project is that we got to go all over the country and meet with Native artists, Hopi quilters, Sioux, Lakota quilters, Odawa quilters, Hawaiian quilters. And everywhere we went, we were just amazed at what a robust scene of activity it was, and one with deep history, which Margaret will be talking about in just a moment. So I think what was so fun also was that there was such a great variety of engagement in quilting, from things that were very traditional and to things that were studio art oriented. So I'll just go to the next slide. Margaret, do you want to say anything about this map?
Well, we realize there are people coming from viewing from out of the country. So just real quickly, you can see on this map the names of the tribes. A lot of them are concentrated along the coasts of the United States. So when we talk about the Southwest, we're talking about Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. When we talk about the Northeast, we're talking about New England. And then Plains is in the center of the country on the northern side. So those are some terms that we'll probably be throwing out. And just to give you a sense of the, hello?
Yeah, you're okay.
I've lost view of the production though.
Oh
my.
We hear you and we see you.
Okay, well, maybe that's enough. In the meantime, I'm gonna see. I didn't touch anything. It's not my fault.
You can get your technical helper there.
Let me get my technical helper.
Yeah, and I'll go to the next slide and fill in for you. I think one of the things that we wanted also about this, showing you the map at the beginning, is just to show you the number of tribes, the number of Native nations that exist in the US, and that it's not only in the West. We have indigenous peoples lived all across the states. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one. And again, like showing you the map, we thought it would be helpful before we start just to show you some terms that you might hear us refer to. Sometimes we say Native American and sometimes we say American Indian. Alaska Natives prefer that way of phrasing it. Native Hawaiians also prefer that. Sometimes we'll say indigenous. Sometimes it's referring to people by their tribal names. So yeah, you heard Margaret what is both Seminole and Navajo. Well, we want to also call out those cultural identities as we look at them. And then we were checking the number yesterday, and it's 574 tribes are recognized in the US right now. And that's recognized by the federal government, but there are also settlements of peoples who share language and culture that go way back that are not necessarily recognized by the federal government. And some are recognized by the state, but not by the federal government. And I think it's also important to know that there are 296 spoken languages in the US. And that means that we're also talking about terminology that is pertinent to a quilt or quilt making in one language is very different from another cultural group's language. So it's very complex here. Margaret, we can hear you. You did want to say something about clan. I know you can't yet see the slide. I think you're muted, Margaret. Well, I'm going to advance to the next slide and we'll swing back and Margaret can say what she wanted to say about clan, the word clan. But here at least you have some terms in front of you to keep in mind. And also, this is the last slide we're showing as sort of preparation to be talking about Native quilts, is we want you to be aware of issues that have been particularly hard for North American and indigenous peoples to face historically and even today. So
hey, Marsha, sorry,
Yes.
this is Brenna. I'm going to interrupt you. I just wanted to help Margaret get unmuted.
Okay.
So if she can go on the lower left-hand side, the lowest left-hand button says mute. And if she sees a red bar through it, that means she is muted. So if she clicks on it, she should be able to unmute.
I am thinking that she can't hear us right now.
Oh dear.
Yeah, she's texting me that her screen is blank. I can tell her to unmute though.
Do you want, Marsha, why don't you have her go ahead and exit and then come back in, and that should fix this. Okay.
Excuse me while I text her back.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for your patience during our technical difficulty. That is unfortunately the high-tech world we live in nowadays, isn't it? But thank you for your patience. We appreciate it.
Leave Zoom and re-enter. Enter. So. Sorry, I am not a fast texter. That's part of not growing up in a digital world.
Margaret, you can go.
Oh,
There.
are we back?
Oh, good. Margaret, can you
Can you
see
hear
the
me?
screen?
I can see the screen.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Good. Yay. So I just
sorry.
left the previous slide and I said, you did want to say something about clans.
Yes. clans are, since all American Indian tribes are sovereign nations, each, Marsha and I talked about federally recognized tribes. Each tribe has the right to designate the quantum of blood of that tribe, and you can only enroll in one tribe. You can switch tribes, but you can only be enrolled in one at a time. And each tribe designates the quantum. For instance, in Navajo, you have to be at least 1/4 Navajo to enroll. I believe the Cherokee, it's 1/64 Cherokee to enroll. Clans within each group, within each tribe, are a group of people, usually initially related physically, but as the family groups got bigger and bigger, it got harder to remember who is related to who. So this clan system is usually matrilineal, and it is a way to avoid incest.
Okay.
Back to you.
Now I'm going to the next slide. I started to say a couple of things here that discrimination, boarding schools, I think you'll hear referenced by one of our artists later, and missionary and government programs and boarding schools, often connected to those, really tried to erase cultures. They tried, if a child was sent to a boarding school, their hair was cut and they had to wear Western clothes, not their own traditional clothing. And they had to speak English. They can no longer talk in their own language, which did great destruction to people. I have friends who went to boarding school, and fortunately, they don't exist now. Okay, now Margaret was going to talk a little bit about the historical look at quilting in the Native communities in the U.S.
So quilt making spread among Native American tribes as contact and conquest with Europeans as they marched across North America from east to west. Since quilts were an introduced art form, early samples were not collected. In our research, we are guessing the earliest one that is still in existence is from 1810. Other items, of course, those that were purely indigenous and ethnographic artifacts were collected. The quilts were made as bed covers, featured as fundraisers, given as gifts or special occasions, and sold to supplement income. Altered lifestyles, such as limited hunting on reservations once they were established, made quilts important for survival. It's generally accepted that the origin of quilt making within Native American communities was primarily learned through contact with European culture. Traders, missionaries, government agents, including the wives of military personnel and non-native settlers, taught or demonstrated quilt making for Native, usually women. Many tribes, you have to understand, already had an established textile or fiber tradition when Europeans arrived. Many groups, the Cree, the Alaska Natives, the Plains people, had stitched furs and tanned hides into clothing for hundreds of years. Cherokees, thousands, I should say. Cherokee and many California tribes wove baskets. They made clothing out of fiber. And the Hopi and the Navajo in the Southwest U.S. were weaving wool and cotton in the 1600s or maybe earlier. So with the introduction of fabric and needles, it was not so far-fetched or foreign to many tribal groups. So we see here today on the screen a group of Indian women working on quilting. You see a large quilt displayed behind what looks like a sewing bee almost. The establishment of mission schools and churches in the 1800s in Native communities probably did the most to spread quilt making among natives. Fabric and needles were, as well as finished quilts, were shipped in boxes and barrels to mission posts and schools from home churches, which were established probably along the eastern coast. Classes and quilting bees were regular events at schools and churches. Initially, designs used were common patterns popular at the time among the teachers, the Americans and Europeans. You saw hearts and gizzards, the tulip pattern, 4-patch, 9-patch. In this slide, you can see on the upper right a quilt on a native dwelling that has a 9-patch in it. Eventually, on the left, you see a woman using a quilt as a shawl for warmth. And in the lower right, you see a Potawatomi Indian baby in a hanging cradle that you can swing. And that's a star pattern, it looks like. Eventually, some tribal members started using images tied to their own cultures. Some Plains groups had a tradition of painting a star-shaped medallion on a large tan buffalo hide. When they first saw the Star of Bethlehem pattern, bingo, that fit right in. And even today, many quilters in the Plains make star quilts. Some of them, that's all that they make. Some of the floral quilt patterns like strawberries and flowers, the Jacobean florals, were favored by the Great Lakes tribes because they had a tradition of floral images executed in porcupine quill work and birch bark cutouts. So as many American quilters have used quilts to protest injustices and highlight political views, so now have many Native American quilters done the same. But quilts are still made for utilitarian use, artistic expression, as gifts on important occasions, for fundraisers, and for sale to supplement income.
Thanks, Margaret. So I'm going to show sort of a deep dive into Native quilt history. And in that first exhibition at the Smithsonian, we included 1 or 2 star quilts that came out of Michigan, not from the plains, but out of Michigan, among the Odawa people who live in the northwest part of the state of Michigan. And I first became interested in the Native quilts in Michigan because I inherited my great-grandmother's quilting scrapbook. She lived in Detroit. She was, in the 30s, in the 40s, she was a very prolific quilter. She kept a scrapbook, correspondence with her quilting friends, but also clippings about the Detroit news, quilt shows, and the Detroit news quilt column that ran in the paper regularly. And one photograph of a quilt, and it has a derogatory term here, but it was being admired by the judges of the show one year. And, it was a star quilt, but look at the floral motifs that are in there. Those relate to what Margaret just spoke of. They relate to the kind of aesthetic preference for design that exists among the woodland Indians of this region, my region that I'm living in. And so here are those first 2 quilts we saw. And we did community quilt discovery days. This was in the 80s. We, at one quilt discovery day, one of the quilts on the left was brought in by a white family, and it carried with it the family story that it had been made by a woman named Anna David, and it was traded for goods. At another quilt discovery day, not too far from that same area that we held the first discovery day, another person brought in this quilt on the right. And again, family story said it was connected to a Native person in that region. Well, we got very interested when we looked at these two quilts side by side and could see that there were these floral applique corners and in the diamonds or in the triangles. And we thought, oh, this is really interesting. They look like almost this from a same hand, or maybe it was from, people who knew each other. Well, then I remembered that clipping in my great-grandmother's scrapbook, and look at this. We've got 3 different variations on the same theme. And interestingly enough, carrying some of the very same kinds of fabric. Well, with some research, and now I'm joined in that research by Minnie Wabanimki, who lives in Poshabi Town, the town that had the church, originally a mission church, that years ago I had interviewed Minnie's father, Archie Miller, and he recalled his mother, Susan Miller, working in the basement of that church with a number of women making quilts. And here is a photograph on the left of the basement of the church today. And you can see the valances that also carry applique floral motifs. And Archie Miller's mother, the quilt maker, Susan Miller, is buried just behind that church. Well, with help from a number of individuals from the tribe, the Grand Traverse tribe of Odawa, another word for Ottawa Indians, and Chippewa Indians, Ojibwa Indians, we were able to find 7 other quilts. And so we now, including one made by Minnie Wabanimki's grandmother, Susan Miller. So we're now in the process of trying to find when did that activity take place? Where did they get their fabrics? And trying to find other people who recall that quilting activity. So staying on the theme of star quilts, though, again, Margaret mentioned how they're popular among the Plains people, and I just want to show you a brief video, and I'm going to have to get out of my PowerPoint for a second, and I will, sorry. Oops. And show. Okay. And I'm just going to access my shoot. This is where I might need help from Lucy or Brenna, I'm sorry. Okay, stopping share. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to just look at Chrome. Now, I know this is a lot of talk and forth just for a brief image, but I think it's such a compelling image. So I'm hoping now you can see this video. I'm only going to show, well, it's only 42 seconds. Okay, now, sorry, getting back to the slideshow. Yeah. So what you are just looking at was a basketball tournament, high school tournament players in the Plains area. And at the final tournament game of the season, oftentimes they hold a basketball star quilt ceremony, and each of the players have a quilt made for them by an auntie, a mother, somebody in the community. And at the ceremony, the team players present that quilt, wrap it around somebody, just like, again, that historical photograph showed of the woman with the canoe. And they gift that quilt to somebody who helped them during the basketball season. Maybe it was the bus driver, maybe it was the sports announcer, maybe it was a parent who brought treats, but it was saying thank you with a quilt. And it's done at halftime at the basketball game, final tournament game. It's just a beautiful ceremony. And it's also because so often the native schools from the reservation are the only native school in a high school basketball tournament game. And so this is also a chance for them to have a prayer being sung at the beginning of the ceremony and show that this is part of their culture, respecting others for what they do. And they do it with quilts. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the whole I'm going to skip this by Gwen Westerman and just go right to Gina Adams that Margaret is going to say a couple of words about. I will say, though, that Gwen Westerman is a fabulous quilt maker. She is a Lakota or Dakota, and she is living in the Plains area.
Hey, Marsha.
Professor, yes.
Hey, Marsha, you're still sharing your Chrome browser rather than the presentation.
Okay.
So
Thank
I
you.
think there you go.
Thank you. There we go. Gina Adams now.
Okay, Gina Adams. She is Chippewa and calls herself a contemporary indigenous hybrid artist. Here you can see pictures of some of her broken treaty quilts. It's a large series that's still ongoing. It highlights treaties forced upon tribal groups that were then broken. Often they're group projects, and she invites people to help cut out the letters and assemble the quilts. But also some of them are, these words are mounted onto older antique quilts. So a very contemporary way to highlight broken promises. And do you have Gwen Westerman?
I just skipped over hers. I think
Oh, you did? Okay.
I think for timing's sake, but I've got
Are we up to
Carla's.
Carla? Okay.
Yes.
Carla Hemlock is a Mohawk quilter, lives near Montreal, Canada. Her quilts are not only quilted, but oftentimes heavily beaded. She often selects topics that concern current and historical controversies. Here we see a quilt titled Our Destruction from 2019. It's wool, and a lot of the white that you see on it is beaded. On the left, you see the beaded detail of red sequin shoes. And on the back, the label reads, "Our natural world is an environmental ticking time bomb on the eve of destruction. Time is running out. Our inaction will soon redefine these ruby red slippers to symbolize no place to call home." And Susan Hudson, oh, excuse me. This is also Carla Hemlock. This is the title of this quilt is Turtle Island from 2014. It addresses fracking. You can see on the left the oil derrick and the red and yellow diagonal lines out to the sides represent the red flame shooting from the four directions are beaded. And
No,
turtle.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you could say what the turtle symbolism is.
In the Mohawk mythology, the turtle is the earth.
Recently, I watched a video interview with Carla Hemlock, and she said, if a Euro American looks at this quilt, they'll go, oh, that's a turtle. But then if it's a person who is native, they'll go, oh my, you've made a turtle. But if it's an Iroquois, and that's where she is particularly affiliated with, they'll see the symbols around it and they go, oh wow, you've made our turtle. So she says it gets different reactions depending on who's the viewer. Now I'm going to try and again stop share and get the other short video that we wanted to show you.
Can I speak while you do that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So Susan Hudson here is a well-spoken, thoughtful Navajo woman who creates quilts that address painful historical and political issues. She started entering quilts in competitions in 1992. Interestingly to me, she found time to quilt while raising 4 daughters and working, and during that time she earned a black belt in judo. This is a short clip of a quilt called Tears of Our Children, Tears for Our Children, which is now in the Idle George Museum in Indiana. Here she documents, in the quilt, she documents the US government policy of forcing families to send their children, some as young as 4, to boarding schools in an attempt to assimilate them into Anglo society.
Okay.
Susan Hudson, I'm also called Traditional Woman. I'm a Dene, I'm Kia Ani Nishle. And this right here is my quilt, Tears of Our Children and Tears for Our Children. I had a dream a year and a half ago about this And what I did was, it took me a while to do it, but I wanted to tell our stories, mainly my story, my mother's story, my grandmother's story, and everybody else's story. And what I did was that my mother, in 1944, my mother was 4 years old when they came to take her away to the boarding school. And so what I want to show right here was the love that my great-grandmother had for my mother, that when they took her away and put her in the wagon, that she tried to go over there, but she was stopped. So what I did inside the wagons, I have outlined of children that were taken away before and were taken away afterwards. And then right here with the women, I have outlines of women that cried and tried to get their children, but then the army stopped and the soldiers came, and some of them were even killed, you know, trying to get their children back. And then right here on the wagon, I don't have wheels. I have, these are handcuffs, because the night that my mother went to the boarding school, they handcuffed her to the bed. They whipped her for not having underwear on and not speaking English. So that's the Tears for Our Children part. And then right here, I want to show how beautiful we were, our clothing, our lives, our beliefs of being alive, of being Native, no matter what tribe we were. And so this is from my Uncle Edison. I did that for my Uncle Edison. I did this for my mother. And I did this one for Senator Campbell, his uncle. And I did that, and then I made the little beadwork, so all you beaders out there, you don't have to worry about me. I'm okay. And then this one's for Chief Hollow Hornbear, his great-great-granddaughter, Becky. I did that for her. And then this is Senator Campbell's father, Albert. This is one of his grandmas that was, her name was Red Shaw Woman, and she was in Sand Creek Massacre. This is for my Uncle Tommy. And this was for my grandmother. She was herding sheep when they came and took her away. So I did that. So then I wanted to show up here the Tears of Our Children, where they have the outlines of all the children that have been killed in the boarding school, and how they put the clothes on too big, so they had to, they didn't have the belt, so they would give them the ropes. And this was mostly for my grandmother. She cried when they cut her hair. So this is showing her. And then right here I have the little pink ribbon. But what they did with my grandmother, after her hair started growing out, they gave them rags to try to curl it so they looked like they were white with curly hair. It's kind of like the Shirley Temple look. But what they would do was take that little piece of rags and put it in their hair to make it look pretty. So I did that. And then I showed where they're trying to learn, making them stand at attention. And this is the night that my mother was beaten, that one of the older girls came to comfort her, so that's what I did. And then I have the other children. But this one is for the young, the ones that had their braids or powdered their hair that got cut off. So this is what the story is about. And I did that for all of us. I have a lot of elders that come up and say, this is my story. And I don't put faces on them too, because Great Spirit's the only one that can give us sight, can give us breath, can give us voice. And a lot of people come up and all they can do is imagine and put their faces there, and that's them.
Okay, you should have a piece by Margaret Wood now on the screen.
So this is a 4-panel Navajo Sun. I've done these since 1998. They're all originals. The faces are originals. These are based on a Navajo myth about the Navajo Sun and the Navajo Moon. I do 1 panels, I do the 4 panels, and I've made as large as a 16 panel for a king size bed. Next. My early quilts were a lot of geometrics based on beadwork and baskets and woven Navajo rugs. But I got bored with that, and I started making more family stories. So this is it's called Helen May Watchman Wood's May's Quilt. And my mother is center top in a green tiered skirt. To the right is the hogan she was born in, represents the hogan she was born in. On the lower right is a Marlboro man that symbolizes my father. And these are just places we lived and where I grew up. This stair step element that you see is the Navajo wedding basket, and this represents her path. So she goes to the right, and she ended her journey in 1964. Next. This is Indian woman. It's about, I know all women juggle roles all the time. You're a mom, you're a sister, you're a wife, you work, and you're a friend. But for Indian women and women of color, we do all these things while we jump back and forth between the dominant society and our cultural and our family and culturals. So this is a woman, half her outfit on the right is more traditional. You can see the shiny things across her back and down the right sleeve are represent silver buttons that would have been on a traditional, one of the traditional styles of Navajo clothing. She's wearing a concho belt, and then the right side of the skirt is tiered. On the left side is plain on the jacket because it's a business jacket, and the skirt is just an A-line skirt. So this is my interpretation of what it's like to be an Indian woman.
Can you tell
And
this? Can you tell the story
ahead.
about your two boys seeing that spread out on your bed?
Okay. So when I was working on it, my biggest space to work on was the bed, and I was trying to stitch down her hair. And this is it's a fall of my own hair that I had when I was in college, and I had kept it all those years. And when I was doing this, I thought, oh my gosh, I can use that. So I was stitching it down, and my younger son came home from school earlier because he was a little guy, and he walked into the doorway of the bedroom and he stopped and he said, is somebody laying on the bed? And I said, no, it's my quilt. And he had been watching me work on it. About an hour and a half later, my older son came home, saw me sewing down the hair, and he stopped in the doorway and said, is that somebody laying on the bed? And so I explained, no, it's okay. So she does, and she is life size. In fact, I had my husband trace me so the arms weren't too big and the proportions were right. So that it took me 10 years to realize that this was me. Next. So my latest project, for years, I had a small business for 30 years. I did booths at Indian markets, and I worked to keep my booth full of merchandise and products. In 2011, I closed down the business because my husband had retired and we wanted to travel more, and it was just too hard to keep a business going when you're traveling that much. So I, since then, have had the luxury of doing what I want, and I decided to do the Monument Valley Project. And this is a series of quilts based on photographs taken by my husband of Rain God Mesa in Monument Valley, Navajo. It's a Navajo Nation park in far northeastern Arizona. And so the mesa is it looks like a table. It's a sandstone monolith. And this is the southern edge, the southeast corner, and the eastern edge of Rain God Mesa. You're looking, the big quilt on the right is number 2. And this is a maquette. You see on the left is a maquette, photographs of the quilts, and roughly arranged in the order they will eventually be shown in. I hope they've never been shown altogether publicly. Now that the pandemic is ending, I'm hoping to start working on finding place to show it. I've never seen them all hung side by side as they were designed to do.
And the scale of those, Margaret?
Oh, yes. They're all 7 feet tall and they're about 5.5 feet wide.
Good, thank you. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to just do a 5 minutes of showing how you can find some of this kind of information in the Quilt Index. So again, I'm going to stop sharing this and going to go to, yeah. And so if any of you heard, I did a presentation with Beth Donaldson on how to use the Quilt Index, but this is just going to focus only on the places that are, I think, particularly of interest if you want to study native quilts. So this is, I'm going to try and do it in real time. If it doesn't work, I've got the bookmarked pages. So let's just, yeah. So when you get to the Quilt Index and you click off of that greeting, you can go to quilts, stories, artists, collections, resources. You can also do a search, and in the search, you could put in the word Native American. But if you don't find anything, you should try one of those other words like American Indian, or maybe even specifically the tribal name. And as you also heard Susan Hudson say that she was Dene, and that's a word in Navajo language for a Navajo person. So sometimes you might need to put in several different variations of words before you can actually get to where you want to go. But I want to just point out a couple things. We have collections in here. And you get into different kinds of collections. You can get documentation projects. Those are mostly the documentation projects that were done state by state or province or even national. You can look at by museums. We're going to special collections. And this is cooperating, I think. And this is where I'm going to show you that you can go load more, all different kinds of thematic collections. We're going right here to a collection that is at the Michigan State University Museum where I'm a curator. And these quilts, many of them were acquired during the research for the To Honor and Comfort exhibition. And again, while we should only take a moment here, but it is probably the collection in the US that has the most diversity in terms of selections of quilt making, historical and contemporary, of peoples across the North America. So there's a little essay. You can go down here and then you can see the quilts. And oh, look at here who we have. There was Margaret Wood. So this project culminated in 1998. So and you can see there's a lot of quilts. So it's fun to look at. And you can see Margaret's quilt right there. I could click on it and would show larger. And then look at all of those Plains era quilts. And you can just keep, and quilts that are related to the basketball ceremony, or quilts that are related to or inspired by a person's beadwork. Sometimes they even just look like other textiles, like in this one by Conrad House. He specialized in making quilts that looked like woven textiles. So that's where you can go. Now I'm going to show you one more thing. So some we'll go back to artists. And searching. And here again, we load more and we load more. Now these are artists of all kind, all ethnicities, etc. But like Rita Corbière is from Northern Michigan. And so we just keep loading, and eventually we'll get to, and I'll go right to it now, because there, we'll get to a Margaret Wood page. I clicked on the icon and it shows like this. And then there's more biographical information about her. And then you can see the quilts that she has in the Quilt Index so far. These are just a little sampling of her work. So that's my little tutorial. I'll end it there, but it at least will give you a beginning step to investigate further. So let me just go back and there. So at this point, we just want to say thank you for letting us share our interest in Indigenous quilt history. And I'm sure we could take a couple of questions if Brenna and Lucy think that we have some time.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay.
So I think we can sneak a couple in. I thought that this was a great question from Francis. They ask if, can you be adopted into a Native American tribe, or is it only by blood?
Margaret, I'm tossing that to you.
Well, people have been adopted by tribal groups, by families, but if your goal is to get to be considered enrolled and using your adoptive family, that probably wouldn't fly. But the Navajo tribe made Tony Hillerman, who wrote novels about involving Navajos and the Navajo cop. The Navajos made him I think an honorary Navajo, but if your goal is to get enrolled using that as a basis, that wouldn't work.
That makes a lot of sense. I could see that. Cassandra asks if any Indigenous men do quilting as well.
Yes, and in fact, I just pointed out that one quilt by Conrad House. And the one that looked like beadwork was also done by a man. So
Nice.
You know, and it's one of those things that men are also often involved in, maybe not the actual quilting, but the preparation and the making of the tools. So they could be cutting out the diamonds for a star quilt, etc.
Okay, that is very interesting. So one of the first questions we got was about the use of the word native, because in Canada, the word native is not accepted. So I'm wondering if you two can speak to that a little bit. And that's kind of our last question, I think, of the day.
Well, there is an issue in the US also about using Native American, because anyone who's born in the US or the Americas, North and South America, could be considered Native American. So that's why I tend to use American Indian, even though it's an applied term. It's more clear about I am Indian, but I'm from America. So there are always issues with labels.
Well, and it seems from an outsider perspective, and I think that this is true when we try to label a lot of different communities, those labels change and evolve over time.
Right.
Yeah. So if it was true in 1998, it doesn't necessarily make it true today, potentially.
Correct. Correct.
And I'll just say that we, when we're doing our field work, we have a line that, a permission form for the person that we interview. And we have a line that they have to fill out that says, how do you want to be described? And so if they want to be called like Ojibwa or Chippewa, it's up to them. You know,
I love that.
which, yeah.
That's a
And
really
then we
great
always
way to
have
say
that as a reference, although we have found that sometimes over time there's politics and somebody starts identifying not Chippewa, which is the English name, but
Mhm.
Ojibwa.
Nice. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well,
Mhm.
I'm so sorry that we don't have time for more questions. We had quite a few, but if Lucy's around and can put up our sponsors one more time. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Really, we could not do Textile Talks if we didn't have a wonderful audience. So thank you for continuing to come to Textile Talks. And we please ask that you continue to come, but also thank our sponsors by patronizing their businesses. So once again, those sponsors are Moda Fabric and Supplies and Quilting Daily, in addition to equilter.com and Aurifil. And we also have Artistic Artifacts, Clover, Empty Spool Seminars, Misty Fuse, Nine Patch Fabrics, Quilt Mania, Schiffer Publishing, The Quilt Show, and Thai Silks. So Marsha and Margaret, thank you so very much for being with us today. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Can I just say one thing is that I saw somebody, I haven't been able to read all of the chat material, but I saw somebody who said they were from Peshabi Town or knew where Peshabi Town was and from that area, who lives in Australia. And I should say anybody who wants could email me at MacDowell, MacDowell at MSU, Michigan State University.edu. I'd love to hear from you. And a shout out to my South African friend. I just happened to see that you were on. So thank you for tuning in.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for being here. And thank you all for being with us today. Once again, this was recorded and you can catch the recording on the SACWA website and on the MQG resources page. So thanks all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.